'90s Spider-Man Clone Saga is probably one of the most well-known Spider-Man stories ever, and definitely one of the most infamous. Oh, it all started out simply enough. Hey, remember when Spider-Man fought that clone created by the Jackal back in the 70s? Well, what if he wasn't dead? What if we brought him back? What would follow would be a 2-year-long clusterfuck where no one from the writers to the editors seemed exactly sure how to end this damn thing. It was during this time they brought into question whether or not Peter Parker, the hero we'd been following this whole time, was even the real Spider-Man. They would kill long-standing fan-favorite characters like Doc Ock, as well as bringing in absolutely incomprehensible characters like Judas Traveler and Scryer. By the end, things got so bad the Marvel bullpen was actively joking to its readers that even they knew that they had lost the plot and that things had gotten really, really bad. Yet despite all of that, the Spider-Man Clone Saga still has this place of reverence within Marvel, and hey, because Ben Reilly is slated for a big return in Spider-Man Beyond soon and everyone's getting all clone crazy again, I figured now would be as good a time as any to take a look at the newest installment in the Clone Saga saga. I'm of course talking about the Miles Morales Clone Saga from Solid and Amid. Because hey, even if the original Clone Saga is much derided, that doesn't mean that for a new Spider-Man writer, tackling it or making some sort of sequel to it isn't some sort of weird rite of passage. Brian Michael Bendis got his Clone Saga in Ultimate Comics, Mayday Parker got hers in the MC2, heck, even Dan Slott did a bit of a sequel to the Clone Saga himself, so I guess everyone just kinda gets their own turn eventually, huh? And of course, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about here today. I'm Cape Joel, and this is the Story So Far, a series where I take a closer, more in-depth, more complete look at a comic book story arc that's completed, give you my thoughts and feelings, and really try and get to the meat of the matter. So with that, let's hop on in, shall we? So then, as the story begins, Miles' parents are horrified when they see a news story detailing Spider-Man's brazen daylight kidnapping of a scientist as well as several high-profile robberies. Obviously, Miles didn't do any of this as he was busy having a side adventure with Miss Marvel Kamala Khan, his teammate on the Champions. Miles might be innocent of these crimes, but unfortunately in his last adventure he put the screws to a very corrupt New York landlord, which means the press now suddenly has reason to think Spider-Man has completely broken bad. The craziest part is, and if you've been reading the Miles book like me, you would already know, this isn't even the first time Miles has dealt with an evil doppelganger. In the last story arc, which I covered on the channel, you may remember the villain known as Ultimatum hired a mysterious, futuristic researcher by the name of the Assessor to kidnap Miles, torture him, and test the limits of his power so he could turn around and make clones, which they did. Miles thought he had destroyed them all in his last outing, but clearly that's just not the case anymore. With the help of his best friend Genki, and yes, I only now realize in the year of our Lord 2021 I've been saying this dude's name wrong for years, is able to riddle out that the stolen goods and scientists just so happen to relate to cloning. Which is pretty strange considering that the clones that Miles had fought previously as Spider-Man were compared to burner phones meant to serve a purpose then be thrown away just as easily. This new Spider-Man Clone Saga also features the continuation of a storyline that's been playing out in the pages of the Miles Spider-Man book for a while now, and that is that Genki just so happens to be dating Miles' ex-girlfriend Barbara. Miles ends up finding out this issue and he doesn't take it very well at all. Yes, he's being a bit immature right now, but he's young, and when you're young, stuff like this hits you that much harder. Miles also admits that he's growing a short fuse recently after the second death of his beloved Uncle Aaron and all the stuff with Cradle cracking down on teen heroes. Don't worry though, because Genki and Barbara don't even stay a couple by the end of this story, making this B-plot actually a little irrelevant. Spider-Man swings out into the night to investigate some leads, and he ends up finding his clone already beat him to the punch. These scientists are terrified of him, and when Peter Parker makes the scene, he assumes that this Miles must be a fake. I do actually appreciate that even though Peter is making a mistake here, it never crossed his mind for a second that Miles could do any of the stuff he's being accused of right now. So he just kind of jumps the gun and assumes he's dealing with an evil clone, and I mean, let's face it, Peter Parker is basically basically a black belt when it comes to evil villains stealing your form and trying to use it against you. Miles and Peter manage to work through their oh-so-classic comic book misunderstanding, and they decide to team up and track down the clone before he can hurt anyone else. They pick up a trail only to be blindsided from behind, as it seems that this new clone comes packing some new powers. Specifically the ability to control its mass like Clayface, and also explode into a bunch of trippy colors. I don't actually understand how those two powers are related, but hey, there they are. As far as Spider-Man family clones go, this is a rather interesting development. Ben Reilly may not have been that different from Peter, but eventually other clones would come packing new sets of powers, and Miles has original powers of his own anyway, so why shouldn't his clones too? The big twist at the end of the first issue is that Miles isn't just dealing with one Spider-Man clone, he's dealing with 3 different ones. Their leader, we discover, is a knife-loving dude by the name of Salim, which is Arabic for undamaged. You know, normally I research these little factoids so you can feel so much smarter when you watch my videos, but this time the character literally just explains the origin of his name in the story. The big gooey guy who they fought before goes by Shift, and finally the last and most monstrous of the spider clones calls himself Mind Spinner. Oh, he'll spin your mind right round like a record, baby, right round, right round. These clones all claim to be better versions of Miles, but they actually don't want to hurt him, only for him to stay out of their way. Naturally, our hero can't let this happen, and with Peter on his side, these 3 don't look so tough. That is until Mind Spinner lives up to his name by assaulting both Spider-Men with mind bullets. That's telekinesis, Miles. The clones escape, and Miles wants nothing more than to scour the city looking for them, but Peter offers him some sage senior superhero wisdom, and that is sometimes you gotta let the bad guys make the next move, lest you run yourself ragged chasing them down. Honestly, I love this little heart-to-heart between the 2 Spider-Men. This might be the most active Peter has been in mentoring Miles in his own book and since, geez, I don't even know how long. I feel this is a relationship that a lot of fans, myself included, want to see in the book, but it's something that the writers have been really apprehensive about showing for some reason. I mean, I get it, Miles didn't need Peter to hold his hand in the Ultimate Universe where he was first created. He was figuring it out just fine on his own, but now he doesn't have to. It's also around here too we discover that Salim and the clones are really living up to their namesakes in a way that Ben Reilly and Kane never did. Turns out they copied Miles' phone during the fight and have been using it to try and fan the flames between him and best friend Genki. Luckily, their friendship is strong enough to know when they're being played, so they decide to forgive and forget. It's actually a bit of a shame that the clones don't try and use this tactic ever again throughout this series, because it's a really good idea. I mean, if identity theft is their game, they should be getting all sorts of credit cards in Miles' name. Miles ends up taking Peter's words to heart and stays up all night to try and finish a very important English essay. You'll remember there was talk in the past couple issues about him getting a creative writing scholarship, and I do really dig this idea of Miles being super smart and artistically intelligent as opposed to Peter's more scientific intelligence. Now, Miles really should call it a night, but when Gank ends up zeroing in on the clone's hideout against his best friend's wishes, he decides to head on out there and try and nip this problem in the bud right away. Miles ends up stumbling upon the clone's not-so-secret lab where they've been making some sort of serum, and in Spider-Man stories, let's face it, green serum is never anything good, so Miles decides to smash it all, assuming they were going to use it to make a clone army or something equally evil. But wait, what a twist! Turns out Salim and the others were only using the serum to try and cure their own clone degradation, and now that Miles has smashed their stuff, he's essentially killed them all. Don't you just hate it when that happens? The insane part is that the clones aren't even really mad at Miles. They say it took guts to be so ruthless, and they respect that kind of thing. And I mean, really, why shouldn't they, given everything we know about these clones so far? They were never meant to survive. They had to fight and claw and yes, even kill to overcome their defective creation, to basically earn the right to exist, if you will. Furthermore, you remember all that torture Miles suffered at the hands of the Assessor, the stuff that he is oh so clearly not over yet himself? Well, the Assessor tortured the clones too, just as bad, to try and forge them into perfect weapons, so in a way, you kinda gotta feel bad for these clones as the reader. Naturally, Miles wants to do everything in his power to try and help these guys, but unfortunately, Salim doesn't trust anyone anymore except for his clone brothers, and if he's gonna be a dead man walking, he wants to use what time he has left to hurt those who have done him wrong, like Miles. But you know, because because he's dancing into full-on supervillain territory right now, he just can't gut Miles and have it over with. Instead, he's decided to go and pick a fight with Miles' mom, who has already died once in the Ultimate Universe, so here's hoping she doesn't go 2 for 2 on deaths. While Selim won't listen to reason, Miles does manage to get on through to Shift, saying that if he is his clone, then on some level they are the same person, and deep down he must know that what the other 2 clones are doing is evil, and if Miles gets free, he'll do everything he can, call up every superhero contact to try and save Shift's life. Miles breaks free and manages to get to the hospital where his mom works just in time to see Rio making a heroic stand against Mind Spinner. Clearly this sort of thing runs in the family, don't you know? Mother and son end up teaming up in a very cool and creative fight scene wherein they take down the nasty Bugman clone. In fact, a lot of the scenes here in this fight parallel the scenes with Ultimate Venom from the Ultimate Universe where Miles' mom died originally. It's only too late though does Miles realize that Selim isn't here and this was all meant as a big smokescreen so he could break into the Morales house and kidnap Miles' new baby sister Billy. Selim very clearly must be an old school Spider-Man fan because he challenges Miles on top of a very large bridge. Geez, doesn't he know that that's more Peter's thing? Miles again tries to reach out to his clone, but it's clear that Selim is far too gone, wanting to die in glorious battle instead of dying the pathetic death of a clone. Miles wins their little duel and proves that he is the ultimate Spider-Man, but it's at that point the situation changes as Mind Spinner and Shift show up. But wait, are you ready for another twist? When Selim wants to drop the baby off the roof, Shift steps on in to defend her. An enraged Selim tries to kill Shift, only for Mind Spinner to protect him, showing once again that not all clones are made equal, and that they do at the end of the day have the power of choice. Selim and Mind Spinner end up seemingly killing each other, which means Miles is left with Shift. At first, he seems scared at the idea of a life without his 2 brothers, but Miles assures him that he does indeed have a family in him, and that they'll do everything they can to save his life. In fact, Miles thinks back on his uncle's death, and how maybe going through all that trauma and sadness is what's gonna help him be an Uncle Aaron to Shift. And with that, we come to the big epilogue of the story. Miles reflects on everything that's happened to him in the last week, while also realizing his suit got trashed in the fight, and that he's going to need a new one ASAP. He could go with the same old design that he's been using forever, but given the number those clones did on his public image, he figures now is time for a change, and I'll judge that change in just a minute. Miles also gets to talk to his mom, who despite almost dying yet again, is really taking all of this in stride. She says that part of her wanted to tell her son to stop being Spider-Man after her newborn was taken, but at the end of the day, she feels like Spider-Man or not, bad things would still find their way into their lives anyway from time to time, and maybe having a son who can fight the good fight is all worth it. I actually really like that Rio ended up being such a big part of this story, as normally this stuff at the end of an arc is reserved for Jefferson, and we've seen him do it so many times now. I appreciate shaking it up. Miles deals with his scholarship essay and brings the story around to the major theme, basically that Selim and the other clones represented his darker side, his anger, his impulsiveness, and all the things that could end up dragging him down if he's not careful. As far as saving Shift goes, it seems that baby Billy might have already done it for Miles. Turns out fighting baby germs was enough to create clone antibodies that saved his life. Well, geez, isn't that convenient? I guess Miles doesn't have to call in any superhero favorites at all now, huh? I keyed, of course. I understand what they're trying to say here, that by Shift choosing the non-violent option, he is ultimately rewarded for his goodness. And hey, wouldn't you just know it, Shift is also a pretty good damn graffiti artist, no doubt yet another thing that the comics are borrowing from the Into the Spider-Verse movie. They also imply that moving forward, Shift is just gonna be Gank and Miles' responsibility, which I'm sure will lead to no end of shenanigans in coming story arcs. And as the comic finally comes to a close, Miles gets some Van Dyne fabric so he can complete his brand new costume, and it is, something, that's for sure. I mean, I don't hate it, it's just not as good as the original. It looks a lot like a tracksuit, and I'm not a fan of covering Miles' mouth. I'm also instantly reminded of when Solidinamid similarly changed Miss Marvel's costume over in that book. That design didn't last long, and I get the sneaking suspicion that this suit too will also have a short shelf life and probably change just in time for the new video game or the Spider-Verse sequel. But hey, I guess part of growing and maturing and changing as a young superhero is cycling through a couple costumes that don't work before eventually coming back to the one that always did. And so that was Miles Morales' Spider-Man The Clone Saga, and what did I think of it? I thought it was pretty alright, mainly because Solid and Amid didn't try and do any tricks, didn't try and make this too big. He just told a very simple, straightforward story about Miles dealing with clones. We don't have to deal with the Jackal, we don't have to deal with his friends and family getting cloned. It just basically is what it says on the tin. And I mean, really, when we're talking about the Clone Saga and Spider-Man, isn't that all you can ask for? A story that's tight, concise, knows what it wanted to do, got it done, while not losing the plot and not wasting everyone else's time? I certainly think so. So that'll just about do it for me on another installment of the story so far. If you have another comic book arc or storyline you'd like to see me cover in greater detail for this series, be sure to tell me in the comments section down below.